The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening and welcome to Strategic Planning, a Lions University course brought to you by the USA-Canada Lions Leadership Forum. My name is Lion Budwall and I would like to welcome you to this evening's webinar and remind you that we are recording this session for those who cannot participate live or for anyone wishing to review the material at a later time. And once we begin, you may be asked to respond to a question, or you may have a question yourself or a comment, and this can be handled either by typing your question in the questions pane in the panel along the right side of your screen, or by raising your hand or clicking on your hand so you can be unmuted and giving you the opportunity to share verbally with the entire group. Strategic Planning is course 209, a required course for the Lions University Master's Program that is designed to help Lions lead at the district level. The Master's Program involves the completion of the 10 required courses that you see on the left side of your screen, and at least 5 of the 13 electives shown on the right side of your screen. This is the Lions University website, lionsuniversity.org, and this slide shows a page in the bachelor's program listing the courses offered in that level. Now, the master's program page would have a similar information, but would also include the courses in the master's program. And if you were to click on any of the courses listed on the page, you would then be taken directly to that particular course page, giving you all the details for the course, along with a link to register for the course and links to any course handouts and the course quiz. We even have a calendar page you can click on to see what courses are scheduled in the weeks and months ahead. This slide shows what a course page typically looks like. It lists the course name and number, gives a description of the course, shows who the faculty member is, and gives you links to register for the class and any of the course materials that might be provided by the faculty member. If you haven't already done so, you will have to create a separate username and password to get in to register for the course and have access to the quiz. After participating in the webinar or watching the video of the webinar, you can then click on the Mark as Completed tab at the bottom of the page, and you will be allowed then to take the quiz. When you complete the quiz and submit your answers, you will instantly be given the results. You can then click on the My Account tab near the top of the page and see a first-hand view of the courses you have completed in both the bachelor and the master's level programs. Our faculty member this evening is Lion Tom Matney. Lion Tom hails from the great state of Kentucky and makes home in Harrodsburg, Kentucky. He is a past international director, having served on the board from 1994 to 1996. He is currently the Area 1C GMT leader, working with several states on membership, 4 or 5 states if I'm not mistaken. And he has remained very active since completing his time on the international board and has actually been asked many times to be a faculty member of the District Governor-elect School at the International Convention, as well as leadership seminars at the international conventions and various LCI institutes. I consider Tom a good friend, and it gives me a great pleasure to welcome him here tonight as a faculty member of Lions University. So Lion Tom, welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Lion Bud, and and thank all of you all. Welcome to strategic planning. Thanks for participating. We certainly appreciate the commitment you're making to our association and the investment of your time in the success of our service delivery efforts. Line Bud mentioned the opportunity to make comments and ask questions as we go through the next hour, and we certainly look forward to you doing that. Hopefully we've got some folks in the audience who have been involved in successful strategic planning efforts, and we look forward to some questions and comments from those efforts. Strategic planning, as I think about it, can be defined in a multitude of ways, and the process is certainly different depending upon whether you're working with a large corporation or a small group of folks, depending on the horizon you're dealing with, whether you're thinking in terms of a 1-year horizon or a 5-year horizon or even a longer horizon, as well as the focus of your plan. It's generally thought of as a very rigid, detail-oriented process, but certainly can be very flexible. And as you think about the work that you're doing, the strategic planning that you're involved in, I would certainly recommend that you adopt a process that fits you and your group, a process that you're comfortable with. You just want to be careful not to compromise the outcomes, and the outcomes being those plans that you're putting into place. The process we'll be talking about tonight during this session is a process designed for a fairly small group with a 1 to 2 year horizon, so fairly short term, and in a nonprofit environment. So the things that you're looking at and dealing with are a little bit different than they would be if you're thinking of a for-profit endeavor. It's a process that I've used successfully with Lions Clubs and district cabinets, as well as small nonprofit organizations, and it can be completed in a fairly short and relatively short period of time. If we go ahead and look at the definition, the loose definition that we'll be working with this evening is strategic planning is a process that groups or organizations use to determine where they're going over the next year or more, how they're going to get there, and how they will know whether or not they got there. It's an activity that's extremely useful in setting organizational priorities, in ensuring that everyone in the organization is working toward those established priorities. It can also be used to help allocate resources or to make sure that the necessary resources are allocated appropriately, and securing the participation and commitment of all parties involved. Now, since we're in our Lions University, most of our discussions will be wearing a Lions vest, but the process and tools are equally applicable outside our Lions organization. Our objectives for this session are for you to recognize the concept and benefits of strategic planning, to see how it could help you set priorities, establish agreement around common goals, focus energy and resources, strengthen the organization, and help drive success. And the second kind of objective is to explore the process of strategic planning to some extent, and then third, to be able to use the strategic planning process to grow our service potential. Anybody have questions to this point? Since I don't see any hands going up, we'll go ahead and begin the exploration of the strategic planning process with a kind of a brief overview. And the process, as I think about it and use it, begins with the 5 items that you'll see on the left of the slide, with our mission leading off. We'll cover each of those areas in a bit more detail as we go forward, but for now, let's just call those 5 items now the preparation stage. Those 5 things are all about developing the foundation providing the framework or boundaries, or setting the stage for what follows. The next steps are about taking all that information, developing priorities, and making the transition to outcomes. Then comes the process of figuring out what tactics or strategies are available to you to drive the desired outcomes. And then finally, the actual action plans, the who, what, when, how much. The key here is action. Although everything up to this point is anticipated to be done once a year or once every couple of years, the action plans become very much a working document to be reviewed frequently and the appropriate adjustments made to ensure success. One of the ways I think about the strategic planning process, and maybe it's an easier or a simpler way to think about it and understand what's going on or what's needed at each step, is to compare it to planning for a road trip or a vacation trip or just a vacation activity. And so if we think about that vacation activity or the road trip, our mission for traveling or might be renewal, could be family bonding, it could be something like relaxation, could be education, or any number of things. But it's really what's our purpose for taking that trip, or our purpose for going on vacation. And then you'd move to our vision of that. And so if you continue that vacation or road trip, our vision of a vacation that was for relaxation might be an umbrella on the beach, a lounge chair with a Mai Tai in our hand. Or if you were thinking about education, our vision of that might be a museum, or it could be something like a hammock hanging off the side of a mountain if our mission was exploration, mountain climbing, and those kinds of things. So then we think about what our values are, and that's really our priorities for how we carry out our trip. It's the priorities, things like we want to make sure we have fun, or we want to make sure there's no stress, or we want to make sure that our trip includes some new adventures. It's whatever those things are that we've considered and think about as our priorities for that. Mandates that I have listed there would be things like speed limits, visas, passports. It's those things that are, quote, mandated that you have to have in place if you're going to be successful at taking that trip. And our environment includes things like, well, it would include the weather. It might also include the time we have available, if it's going to be a 3-day trip or a 1-week trip or a 1-day trip, or the time would be an important part of that. One of the other things might be, what other people are traveling, how crowded is the beach going to be, and am I going to find a spot for my umbrella and beach, lounge chair on the beach. Might also include, what resources are available for that trip. But it's those things, that you think of that are really kind of outside your immediate control, but are certainly a part of what you think about as you think about traveling, think about vacation. Our goals then would be, equivalent to those things we want to accomplish, or those things we want to do on the way, during our trip, or in fact at our destination. The strategies would be how we want to accomplish those things. It might include the available modes of travel. It might include the route we want to take. It might include whether or not we want to go on the bus, or we want to take Amtrak. It would be our, how we want to accomplish those things in terms of our travel. And the action plans, who does what, when, and how, would be who's driving when, how far, who's making the reservations, who's setting all of those things up. So kind of a real quick overview, but does that prompt any specific questions from any of you?
I don't see any.
Seeing no.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Tom. I don't see any questions coming through here. What 4 hands raised, so we can go on to the next slide, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say I didn't see any hands coming up either, so I'm hoping that that means everybody's still with us. If we begin to take a closer look at that, again, we start with kind of the mission, because the mission statement is usually a brief written statement of the organization's purpose. It really talks about why we're here, why we do what we do. There's a tendency to make it, really, I guess, more philosophical and elaborate. It doesn't need to be terribly elaborate, but it does need to be clear and concise enough to allow understanding and buy-in for each member of the organization. The mission statement is something that can be, and is a lot of times, developed by an executive group, or if there's an existing mission statement, sometimes the executive group can just review that to make sure that it's still current, it's still appropriate, and that can be done really as one of the kind of the preparatory steps as you begin to think about or planning for strategic planning. I guess a caution, at least from me, would be don't let it become too philosophical or too burdensome. I've actually seen groups work with our motto, "We serve," very, very effectively. If you do use something like the "We serve" motto, or something that's that general, then the vision statement or your compelling description of what that looks like becomes more important and more of a driver in your strategic planning process. If we move then to the vision statement, it is that compelling vision of how the organization will or wants to be, what they should look like at some point in the future. It should be clear, concise, and memorable, but don't beat it to death. Mission and vision can be very difficult for some groups to separate. And although I really prefer that they be separated so you can think about them independently, it's not a death sentence, or I wouldn't consider it a death sentence to combine them. They're very much foundational. And if it's easier to think about them and deal with them as one cornerstone of the process, then that's okay to do that.
Lion Tom?
The next, yes.
We've got a question from Lion Nancy. She asked, should we have a planning for each project we do, as well as keeping them for reference in later years?
I would think about strategic planning more as a one-time-a-year opportunity to look at the 4 or 5 things that you consider the key things that you're working on, and the strategic plan, the actual plan for each event, would be the item that you follow up on periodically. And you'd want to do that on some kind of a routine basis. It's really pretty specific as to what the event is, as to how often you follow up on that. But yes, you would want to review that really frequently.
Okay.
Did that get at what you were looking for?
I think so. She was,
okay.
Yeah, she said yes. So we got one question.
Okay. Okay, then if we think about kind of the next 3 elements of that, the values, the mandates, and the environment, they're more what I would think of as exploratory. They're the things that are going to cause you to do some additional research or exploration, or talk to other people, as well as talking to your own team members and members of the organization. Sometimes it makes sense to get at them through surveys or focus groups, but it also could be just individual discussions or group discussions, or again, depending on exactly what you're talking about or what your strategic plan involves, it might even be something like a market study. And you can do market studies even in lines organization. You don't deal with products that you're selling, but you still deal with those things that you're doing or those events that are going on, and look at what role they play in the market and how valuable they are. The values piece of it, as you look at it, is almost entirely internal. in most of our lines groups and most of our lines activities. And on that slide that says values, I've listed some possibilities or some thought starters, but the values that drive your organization and become a part of your planning process should very much be owned by and come from your leadership and your members. I wouldn't try to make the values overly complicated, but do make sure that they're included. You do want to spend some time talking about them because they become that framework that we operate within. And I guess one caution I would have there is make sure you do talk about those at least to some extent prior to getting into the actual planning process, because there's a tendency if you don't talk about those and you start the planning process that you really make those values fit the goals that you've decided you want to work on, and you want to do that the other way. You want to make sure that the goals that you've decided to work on fit within your existing value structure, that they support your existing values. Mandates are sometimes thrown in with the environment and included with those in considerations. I've really included them here as a separate consideration because of their influence on activities like youth camps, particularly fundraising activities. If we do things like gaming licenses and those kinds of things, there's some very strict mandates with some of those things that we have to be aware of. So I've included them separately. In some cases, depending on what you're dealing with in your strategic planning, they may not be as important to think about, and you can include them, with other things, the other pieces of the puzzle. But they can be imposed by any number of sources and will likely require some extended research. And if in fact you need to do research, I'd make sure you involve somebody that's fairly close to that event or activity, so that they understand the things that they're talking about and the things that they're involved in terms of mandates. The term that you hear most often associated with the element that I'm referring to as the environment is what I'll refer to as a SWOT study. It's a study of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's the strengths and weaknesses are generally thought of as internal to the organization, and opportunities and threats are external influences, events, and activities. This is the area that really affords your organization the greatest opportunity for improvement. It's the area that allows you to make sure it stays abreast of the changing needs within the community and assess its perceived value and relevance to the needs of the community and the things that are going on in the community. So, as you start to look at, that external opportunities and threats, and even to some extent the internal strengths and weaknesses, you want to give some thought as to how you gather that data. What questions you ask, who you ask, what indicators will you look at, who's going to be involved in gathering information. When you're looking at the internal strengths and weaknesses, as much as you can, you want to involve every member. It depends on the size organization that you're dealing with, obviously, so that's not always possible to involve them all at the same time. But you want to make sure you get input from as many of them as possible in terms of what the strengths and weaknesses are that are internal to the organization, and then externally, you want to look at your impact in the community or your impact to your client base, which generally is the community as we think about that. It's an area that affords really some significant opportunities to involve your cabinet or club members, but you also want to think about the privacy issues and data integrity, just to make sure that you are protecting those. And this is kind of what I think of as up to this point, those activities lend themselves to being accomplished as individual steps, and a lot of them can be accomplished as a group, or they can be accomplished by selected individuals depending on the needs and makeup of the group, and really your preferences as you begin to do the what I think of as preparation for strategic planning. But at this point, all of the data that you've gathered, really should be analyzed, and I'd recommend that the executive group develop some recommendations for the entire group to consider. And in really smaller groups, the entire group can do that, but it's usually more effective and certainly more efficient if the executive group takes a look at, has a little time to digest the information that you've gathered to that point, the things that are involved in your environment, your strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats in particular, and kind of narrowed that down some and are ready to make some recommendations to the entire group for the things that you ought to be working on or the things that you want to consider as you go forward. And then at this point, it's once you're ready with those recommendations, if it's possible, it would be the time to do kind of like a retreat to finalize the process. And if a retreat is not possible or feasible, then you'll consider a series of smaller meetings or devise some creative ways to involve as many of your folks as possible in the next steps, because that's really I guess what I would think of. Each step is really significant, but this is where the action really begins to take place, because the next steps would be to look at all of that information and begin to prioritize the issues and the opportunities and concerns that you've identified, evaluate their support of your mission, your vision, and values, and kind of screen them through that to make sure that they do, in fact, support your mission, that they fit in your vision, that they fit within the framework that your values provide, and you identify the top 3 to 5 to begin developing specific goals and action plans to address. And really, as I think about that, it's important to narrow that list down to the top 3 to 5. It's really dangerous to try to work on more than that. First off, you're not going to. If you don't get it down to the top 3 or 4, then you're probably not actually going to make any progress on any of them. So you want to make sure that you do get it down to that. One of the things that's sometimes very difficult for some of your folks is letting go of issues that they have a particular investment in. But as an organization, you can't afford to allocate your available time and resources to activities that don't support your mission. And I generally don't advocate throwing them out or discarding them or getting rid of them. You want to keep them in front of the group so that they are aware that they're still there. They just don't make the transition to the top 3 or 5 opportunities or issues to address. A lot of times groups will want to combine those things and really kind of force all of them into, or more of them at least, into your top 3 or 4 or 5, and I'd recommend not doing that. You want to keep them broken down so that you understand specifically what those issues or concerns are that you're working on. And then for those top few opportunities, issues and concerns that support the organization's mission, vision, and values, begin to write some SMART goal statements. Depending on the preferences of the group, those can be created in smaller groups, and generally that's a much more effective way to do that, is to take those top 3 or 4 issues or concerns or opportunities that you've decided to move forward with and assign a group to those to write that goal statement, and you certainly want it to be a group that has some investment in that opportunity. But once you get that small group to create that goal statement, then you want to make sure that it's shared with the full group, because you want to make sure that everybody not only understands that, but you want to secure their commitment and buy-in to that goal and that direction, that activity. An issue here is to be sure that folks composing that goal statement have access to all the the pertinent information about that, the history of the issue or concern or opportunity, the key drivers, the things that really affect that, so that they begin to put that together. Once you have full group buy-in and commitment to the goals identified, then you can begin to develop strategies. And the focus here should be on asking questions. It's not just what strategies have we used, but what strategies might be available. What tools or strategies might we want to develop or think about developing to accomplishing those goals. Some of those, there might be just things that, like we just raise money to support them. Some of them might be things that we need hands-on expertise for. And some we may need to partner with other organizations to accomplish. And one of the things we're seeing, I think, in a lot of our Lions clubs and organizations is that we are reaching out to other groups to pull them in to not only to access more manpower, but to access resources or access expertise to get those things done. So when we begin to look at strategies, again, you want to begin to ask those questions about how might we do that. It's as Lions, we have a tendency to think about what we did over the last couple of years or what we've done over the last 5 or 10 years and how we've done those things. And certainly we want to take advantage of the opportunity here to expand that and reach out in some other areas to get that. The next steps then would be beginning to develop some specific action plans and a timeline. And again, if we think back to our road trip, you think about it in terms of who drives when and what we're driving and those kinds of things. But it would include determining what resources are required and making sure that we have resources allocated to be successful at driving those. For those of you who are familiar with Gantt charts, and I'm sure that some of you are, I don't necessarily recommend going to the level of developing a Gantt chart, but you do need to get to the level that the key activities are reflected on some sort of timeline, and the more detail that you can include on that timeline, the quicker you will be able to identify deviations and be able to make appropriate corrections. If we've been specific enough with the goals and action plans, most of the measures and milestones are already identified and will be in place, but we'll need to determine how often we want to review those and when plans might be adjusted. I think kind of where Nancy was going earlier with that question, it's how often do you check those to make sure where you are. And I prefer a process that makes the top things we're working on agenda items for each board meeting or cabinet meeting or council meeting, depending on the group that we're working with. Some of those ought to be agenda items on every meeting every time we get together, so that we almost force the review of that. Without some predetermined review points, we tend to be submerged in day-to-day details and emergencies, and therefore never move forward with the things that we've deemed important. And we spend time developing a strategic plan and narrowing that down to get to the top 3 or 4 things that affect the organization or afford the organization the opportunity to be successful going forward. So we want to make sure that we continue to look at those things and continue to present that opportunity to move forward. It also helps keep our planning process and plan document in particular alive and well, so that we review that, look at it, figure out how we're doing, and if we're not getting there, what adjustments we need to make to make sure that we drive forward. Questions about that?
I don't see any questions, Tom. A lot of this really, especially specifically in the probably in the strategies and action plan process, you're doing a lot of brainstorming, aren't you? Really trying to get as much information and input from everybody as possible, and then even in prioritizing your goals, you're trying to do a lot of brainstorming to get as much information out there as possible, and then try to get a buy-in from everybody as to what are the main priorities what are the best strategies to do that, right?
Yes, especially when you start to put those strategic, the action plans together. You're doing an awful lot of brainstorming. You're doing brainstorming at least to some extent when you're looking at the opportunities that exist, but it's really relevant to the information that you've gathered up to that point. When you start looking at strategies, you're almost completely out on your own. You really begin to look at things that are totally new and different and not necessarily tied to any of those things, but how might we get some of those things done? So yes, a lot of brainstorming, a lot of what you would think of as free thinking in some of those areas is certainly encouraged, and the more you can do that, the more efficiently you can do that, the more that'll allow you to drive forward.
Yeah, we do have a good question here from Lion Nancy again.
Okay.
You see that one just came in? What would be done to keep a clique from taking over and doing their pet project and the top items?
That I guess the first thing I would say is it depends on the facilitator driving that, or whoever's driving the strategic planning process, moving that forward. But it's really based on all of the information that you gather. You're looking at, especially when you're looking at strengths and weaknesses within the organization, you want to be sure to talk about some of those kinds of things. When you're looking at the opportunities and threats from outside the organization, you'll pull in those things that can create the most value for your client base. And so you want to use those things to focus your team members on to at least minimize the impact of that clique, or minimize the impact of those what I would call pet projects that people have, or projects that people have particular ownership in or investment in. They want to drive those. But the more you can pull in the information that you've gathered in terms of what other opportunities exist, or what opportunities exist to make your organization more effective and more valuable to your clients, then the rest of your team members can see that, and they can see the direction that you need to go. And so you'll need to continue to work to focus them on those things.
Okay. I don't see any other questions right now.
Okay. Then we'll think about, how do you measure success? Effective strategic planning can be a very useful tool for us, but we need to be aware of and guard against some of the most common causes of failure. And the first one of those that I've listed there just says incomplete. And basically what I mean by that, and the way I would think about that, is that we get to the point that we've listed those goals, but we never get to the point that we create action plans and strategies for moving us forward on those. We create goals, but we don't really have any plan for how to get to them. We can keep those things in front of us that we thought are important, but we still won't have an access. We won't have a road to travel to accomplish them. And so that's really what I would think of as the most common reason that they fail. The second would be communication, and that's kind of thinking about a situation where you go through and create those plans, and then you put them in a binder and put them up on the shelf, and you don't pull them down and look at them, and you don't review them, and so the next time you get ready to do strategic planning, you pull them off and say, oh yeah, this is what we had, we can start here and move forward. Third one is kind of the leadership's really not committed to any kind of change, because it does require a change in the sense that you want to make sure that you've allocated the appropriate resources and manpower, that you continue to focus on driving those things. And the fourth one I listed there is kind of personal ownership and motivation, and that's really not allowing your team members enough opportunity to interact with the plan or be a part of either the the information gathering phase, or the goal setting, or the planning, the actual who does what when part of that. If they're excluded from that and don't have ownership in it, that will typically not bode well for the success of the plan, and it won't be motivated to do that. Questions about those? Okay, then our objectives for the session were for you to recognize the concept and benefits of strategic planning, to see how it could help set priorities, to establish some agreement around common goals, focus energy and resources, strengthen the organization and kind of help drive that success. And the second being to explore the process of strategic planning. Third, be able to use a strategic planning process to grow our service potential. Did we get anywhere close to those?
I do have a question come on from AJ, Lion AJ. Said, how do you follow up without being considered a micromanager?
The way I would think about that is that if you have laid out your strategic plan so that you have folks identified, you know who's supposed to do what, when you review that at the board meeting, I think everybody knows, whether or not those things are happening, and you're really not micromanaging at all. You're just managing that process, and it's really not a specific person who's managing that process or following up on that. It's the whole team. You're just reviewing what the status is and what's going wrong. And I think the thing that I would think about in terms of guarding against that is you're really not looking at and accusing any particular person or people. It's the process that you want to focus your attention on. I don't know if that answered the question that you're really looking at, but you don't really want to get to, especially in a team meeting, the place where you're looking at individual performance. You want to talk about the process performance and the things that need to improve for that to move forward.
I think you got it. I mean, AJ says thank you.
Oh, okay.
There's
any other questions that we might address at this time?
We'll hold on for a little bit here, see if anybody types in another question. This is really a process that doesn't get accomplished overnight, right?
No, it is a process that doesn't get accomplished overnight. In particular, what I would think of as the exploration part of that, you really want to give yourself some time to think about the information that you're gathering, and gathering it's before you get to planning. It's what I think of as kind of the prepare to plan stage, because you do want to think about ahead of time what those strengths and opportunities, strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats are, to make sure that you're taking advantage of the opportunities that exist in the community for you to become a much more valuable community member. Whether you're thinking about an individual Lions Club and the thing they're doing, or you're thinking about that from a cabinet level and your value to those clubs that you service, or you're thinking about it from an organizational level and it's whatever your client base is. You want to make sure that you take advantage of that opportunity to not only assess what threats are coming at you, because if you think about that from an organizational level, you think about it from who else is providing those same kind of services, who else is selling the same products you are, who else is doing the same things that you are, and what advantage do they have, how much of the market do you own, and how can you become more of a player in that market. And as a Lions Club, you want to think about it to some extent in the same way. You want to think about how you can become more valuable to your community members. And if you're thinking about it from a nonprofit, you might even be thinking about how you can become more valuable to your donor base. You want to figure out how you can be a more effective organization, but you also want to figure out how you can become a stronger contributor. And so during that exploration phase of planning or preparation phase, before you actually start putting goals in place and putting plans in place, you want to make sure you're thinking about those things, because that's really where the additional opportunity for your organization is.
All right, we have another question by Lion Melanie, and this has to deal with action plans. She asked, when executing action plans, would it be more effective to ask for volunteers or just assign the tasks out?
You want to make sure that the people that are assigned to those are the people who have the expertise and the information that's necessary for those. Generally, you want to make sure it is, particularly when we're thinking about our Lions Club, or we're thinking about nonprofits, or we're thinking about volunteer opportunities. Generally, you want to make sure that people are comfortable with that. You don't want to just pick somebody to do it. So volunteers, or folks certainly who have indicated an interest in that, are usually more appropriate. But I'd want to make sure, rather than just volunteering, that it's somebody who has the necessary skills and abilities to come through with it.
Right, I agree. All right, I'll take one more quick look. I don't see anything else right now, Tom.
All right. Well, then, thanks very much for those questions, and certainly thanks for your time and attention, and even more than that, thanks for your participation this evening. And Bud, thanks for your help as well, and kind of keeping this moving.
You're quite welcome. I appreciate you coming on board and taking your time to join us, and Tom. And we'll finish up with a couple of slides here, just to make sure everyone is aware that we will be having a graduation at the USA Canada Forum to recognize anyone who is graduating from the bachelor's program. And in addition, we will have some graduates for the master's program. And we're going to recognize those individuals in a graduation ceremony at the USA Canada Forum on Friday, September 18th, in Grand Rapids, from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock. And you'll be receiving one of those beautiful pins shown on the screen here, the bachelor pin and the master's pin. President Yamada will be on hand to present those pins and certificates of your graduation, the diplomas, and no caps and gowns required, so it's not a real formal thing, but please, if you're going to be at the forum, we encourage you to participate in the graduation ceremonies. Come and be recognized, and we'll have the faculty members there too as well. Our reminder for our next couple of webinars coming up next week on the 18th is a required course on the master's program, recognition, and that was a change from the original schedule. That was supposed to be tonight, but the faculty member had a conflict with this evening, so Line Tom graciously switched with the other faculty members, so we want to thank Line Tom for doing that as well, jumping on board a little bit early, and we appreciate that. So next week is recognition, and the week after that is an elective course on the 25th called Team Building. You can register for any one of those courses on the university calendar page. And with that, want to thank everyone again for attending. And again, thank you to Lion Tom and for being here for the webinar. And we remind you to log out of the webinar in the upper right-hand corner of your control box, your control panel up in the file area. Just click on the X box at the top right corner to log out. And we hope to see you at Lions University in the coming weeks, and actually also see you in Grand Rapids on the 18th of September. With that, thank you very much. Lion Tom, if you want to stay on board for a little while, and after everyone gets logged off, we will just chat a little bit, okay?
Okay.
We'll see you then. Thank you.